The Indiana Hoosiers, in the span of just over 20 months when they first hired Curt Cignetti back in either November or December of 2023, has turned from the doghouse to the penthouse. They're your defending national champions, and they are here to stay. Is the Cinderella tag officially off? We'll discuss that and a lot more here. This is our State of the Program series on the Indiana Hoosiers. What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Lucas Hill of the Southern Sports Scene. Make sure you all do us a favor. Hit the like and share button down below. Turn on the bell notifications so that you are notified every time we go live, posting a video or posting a short here on the Southern Sports Scene. Thank you to our friends at Frost Buddy. Going over to frostbuddy.com. Use the promo code SSS15 to get 15% off of your first purchase on all things mugs, tumblers, whatever it is that you want to put your beverage in. Also, thank you to our friends at Chike Nutrition. With 20 grams of protein, 1 gram of fat, and 1 gram of sugar, you can get the day off with a hearty, healthy cup of coffee. Alec Keezer of the Sigs Insider podcast, as well as Indiana at the Voice of College Football, joining us. Alex, good to see you, my man. This has been something that you and I have been talking about for a good while, and I'm glad that we can finally meet up. Finally, how are you?
I'm doing great. I always jump on an opportunity to talk about the Indiana Hoosiers. I'm obviously a huge fan of the program, huge fan of what Signetti's been able to do. And like you said, Sigs Inside started in July of 2024. Basically me badgering my co-host, Brad Loomis, of like, we need to be talking about this football program because nobody's talking about what's actually going on here in Bloomington. And like you said, since November 30th, 2023 to today, it is a completely different look for the Indiana football Hoosiers. And one I'm really happy to cover.
Take me back to, I believe it was November or December of 2023 when Curt Cignetti was hired as the head coach of the Indiana Hoosiers. And I know that this was a guy that when he initially began his tenure, he said, it's simple, I win, Google me. I've been following him since they first made the move to Division I FBS in 2022. I remember when College Game Day came down in 2023, the very next year. I remember that Signetti was a big deal. I remember him being one of the highest rising head coaches at the time. I remember how much hype there was around him. And then for him to transition from a team that in just 2 years went from playing in an FCS semifinal game to an 11-1 season in 23, takes the Indiana job. Just talk to me about what were the expectations in 2024 before the season begins when he initially gets there. And then just take me through that 24 season as a whole. What did you notice from Signetti? What was the difference between him compared to other counterpart head coaches like your Tom Allens or your Kevin Wilsons?
So, I mean, the expectation after Curt Cignetti was hired by any Indiana football fan was like, hopefully we can go 6-6. Maybe being 8-4 yearly would be something cool to strive for. But the idea of football success at this university was something that most people never thought was possible. Now, you have some people who were there when I was in school, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, where we saw Tom Allen bring the football program a little bit of life, but it was nothing like Curt Cignetti. So when he comes in, the expectation is, okay, maybe he can build some sort of like sustainable bowl game-esque program where Indiana can just be competitive in the sport and the fans don't have to like bury their heads in the sand. But from somebody who was paying attention from the very first press conference, it was very apparent that the attitude and the way that they were conducting business around the program had changed completely. Like by February of 2024, I couldn't hold my tongue anymore. Like I had to be writing about it. It was just the way that these guys had attacked the recruiting trail. They flipped the roster completely. In Curt Cignetti's first 3 weeks on the job, it was 38 guys out, 31 guys in. There's the famous story that Scott Dolson tells where Curt Cignetti actually fell asleep at the wheel and like blew the hubcap off his car or something like that because he like pulled up on the curb because he was recruiting so much. So if you were like paying attention to the day-to-day operations of the program and the way that the recruiting had taken a giant upswing up, the way that the social media output around the program had taken a swing up, something was happening. Now, whether that was going to translate into wins in the Big Ten was a different thing, but this wasn't just going to be a team showing up like, I hope we can compete today. Like, it was very apparent the attitude change was we're going to go try and win football games. And it wasn't something that the team had shied away from either. Like, it was Curt Cignetti, it was the players in the program. Like, they were very outwardly confident, and it was something that like Indiana fans had never really experienced before. And so when you get to the summer of 2024 and these guys are in, fall work, or they're getting ready for fall camp, and you see them at media day, the confidence that they were operating with was like, if these guys don't do what they say they're going to do, they're going to look like idiots in a sense. And like Aiden Fisher is talking about a Big Ten championship in this, like the summer of 2024. Then they open the season. It's not the best show out from the crowd in terms of people in the stadium, but it was a great performance against FIU. Whether it was reflected on the scoreboard or not is a different story. They ran for like 230 yards in the first game. Curt Cignetti blasted the fans for leaving at halftime. They then blew out Western Illinois 77-0, and that's when it was, or 77-3, I apologize. But that's when it was apparent to me that this football team was just operating at a different level, because obviously Western Illinois is an FCS team. They're not the highest level of competition, but anybody who's been around a football program understands how hard it is to execute that many times in a row, to have 10 positive scoring drives. And so the fact that Indiana was able to focus for a 60-minute football game against an opponent they were supposed to blow out, to me, was a major building block. Then they go out to UCLA and absolutely smash UCLA on NBC on Peacock, and the rest of the country was like, okay, maybe there might be something special going on here for the Indiana Hoosiers, and then it all exploded after the Nebraska game. Like, going into the Nebraska game, all the hype was on that Nebraska team. People weren't giving Indiana any chance, and they went and absolutely blew the doors off of Nebraska, and it was like, okay, there are some levels to what's going on here between these two programs. And I like the most unfortunate part about that 2024 team is that people gave the schedule a lot of like they gave it a lot of ire, but they did what they had to do with that schedule. They blew out everybody who they played except for the two best teams in the country. Now, the problem for them was those were the only two quote unquote like big games that they played. And so the perception of the Indiana football team going into the offseason, going into 2025, was that they weren't as good as their record said they were, and that it was inflated because of the teams they played. And it was a lot of commentary from people who weren't watching the game-to-game actions or the play-to-play actions of the football team, because the way Curtis Work operated that offense, the way they game planned for people, the way the defense constricted people, like, it was impressive what they were doing on the football field. And that's why you had a lot of Indiana football fans unbelievably confident about what the team could do going into this past offseason. But to compare Curt Cignetti to any other coach in Indiana football history, he came in with the expectation that he was going to win football games, and it's really that simple.
It's amazing that when I reflect on 24, I remember all the hype that came around Indiana. I remember that Nebraska game. I remember very much seeing the final score of that game, and I remember how good that Nebraska team was supposed to be. That was a top 25 team coming into that year. You have a young quarterback at the moment, and they blew the freaking doors off of them. When you beat a team like that by almost 50, when even that Western Illinois game, it's hard to go down the field and produce those types of drives. When you execute to that point where you're putting up 77 against Western Illinois, you're not seeing a lot of FBS teams doing that. You're not seeing a lot of teams around college football being able to put up those kinds of numbers. When you look at 2025, and this is where I really think that things started to really come into fruition and see that Indiana was going to be a consistent team that would be a contender in the Big Ten. When I look at the offseason at what you guys got, yes, you lost some guys. E.J. Williams, decided to remain, initially went to the portal. That was a massive get back. You know, losing guys like Donovan McCulley, which I think he's going to still was a very talented wide receiver. Then, obviously, a mediocre ending for where he was at. Michigan is a story for another day. But when you go out into the offseason and when you get guys like Roman Hemby from Maryland, I was very high on him during the preseason. When you get guys like Riley Nowakowski, like Fernando Mendoza, like Pat Coogan, Then when you pair them and you mix that roster together, you look at what they were able to produce. Obviously, it was a rough start after that first game where you don't look as good as you were expected to be against Old Dominion, and you had your struggles early on in that football game.
Yeah, it's funny. I actually think it goes back a little further to the 2024 to 2025 transition. The team didn't lose a starter, and I believe Jamari Johnson Johnson, who transferred out, was already losing his job to Sharp. But they took that core of players. You have D'Angelo Pons, who was an All-American, Aiden Fisher, who was an All-American, Mikal Kamara, who was an All-American. They brought all those dudes back. And not only did they bring all those dudes back, there was no real chatter about any of those guys going anywhere. And there was a reported $1 million offer in the portal for Aiden Fisher. So that was the first indication to the Indiana Hoosier fans that this wasn't just going to be a one-hit wonder. There was serious investment in this football program to keep the important people around. Not just players, but coaches, coaching staff as well. Curt Cignetti got extended last year during the season. Brian Haynes got extended at the end of the season. Mike Shanahan got extended, the offensive coordinator, at the end of the season. They fended off USC for Derek Owings, who ended up leaving at the end of this season, which is a conversation for a little bit later. But the program investment was there. So then you go out and you get the best portal quarterback in Fernando Mendoza, and it was at least to me, when you watch that guy play at Cal and you watch the 98 yards with my boys and you listen to him talk, and it was pretty obvious he was going to be a pretty special college quarterback and going to be going to the league in some sort of capacity. We were calling his Heisman campaign in February and March. We were talking about his capacity to be the number one quarterback in this class. And so when you look at all of the talent that they compiled in the offseason, adding to the talent and production that they were bringing back, none of what they were able to accomplish this season production wise was surprising to the Indiana fans who were paying attention. So I think that's why you saw so many people frustrated about the Old Dominion game, and especially the first play of the season where it's blown assignment and there goes Colton Joseph down the middle of the field. And it's wait a second, record scratch. What's going on here? We're supposed to have one of the best defenses in the country. We did have one of the best defenses in the country. It just turns out Old Dominion was a little bit of a tricky game. But there's by the way, they were able to build the roster in the offseason. They had one of the oldest, most produced, returning production rosters in the country. When it comes down to it and you add the quarterback to it, they were going to be a national title contender just based on the roster they put together.
The average age was either 22 or 23, correct?
I don't know what the average age was. I just know they had a lot of guys with production playing. Even the younger guys playing, D'Angelo Pons, 3-year starter as a true junior. Mario Landino, true sophomore, but started as a freshman. Roe Hardy, true sophomore, started as a freshman. Aiden Fisher played 4 years of football. Mikal Kamara, 4 years of football. Lou Moore, 4 years starter. Amari Farrell was his 3-year starter. It's the age of those guys, but it's also the experience on the football field at a high level. That's the other thing. But if you go and look at the Ohio State team that won the title last year, all of those dudes were 4th and 5th year seniors. The Michigan team that won the year before, they had 13 guys drafted, most in school history. Right. So you need a lot of really talented, experienced guys to win in any season. I just think it was extrapolated because nobody was expecting Indiana to be there.
When did you think that the Band-Aid was ripped off of the Cinderella label for Indiana?
From the public, definitely after the Oregon game. From the Indiana fan base, I believe probably after Illinois. From because there's certain sections, right? There's the people who are hyper paying attention, right? And the people who are watching spring practice and reading into how Fernando fits with the team. And there was a lot of really positive chatter about what this team could possibly be. And then there's that next level of Indiana fan that's kind of engaged and wasn't sure if the season last year was a fluke or not. That was convinced at the way we played against Illinois. And then you have the general public who was unsure of whether or not Illinois was properly rated. And you can argue that I don't think they were, but at the same time, still a top 25 program in the country. There's no way to argue the way they performed against Oregon on the road against a top 3 team in the country in that environment. So I think that's when the Band-Aid was ripped off of wait a second, this team's very for real, because Fernando Mendoza threw a pick 6 to make that a tie football game in the third quarter. I think they had less than 60 yards of total offense in the second half. Oregon did. Indiana beat the hell out of them in that football game. And the fact that the score was as close as it was more so mistakes that Indiana was making. Both they weren't calling that crazy shift that Oregon's defensive line was making, and Indiana was turning the football over. But they dominated that football game, and that was when the rest of the country was like, wait a second, that team is really for real.
Yeah, I thought that the Cinderella label got ripped off after the Illinois game. I looked at how, from a statistical vantage point, you don't really see the type of yards that were put up by Indiana as you'd say, oh, well, it looks like that Fernando Mendoza should be putting up 400 yards through the air. But that's not really what Indiana is. They're a team that's going to go down the field consistently, very balanced offense, and that's exactly what Mike Shanahan's offense is. And they made him pay throughout the year. They created explosive plays against that Illini. That was a team that in Illinois that I had going to the college football playoff this past year. And when I see guys like Kobe Martin, who was third or fourth on the depth chart, and he pops off for 100 yards on the ground and 2 scores, and Kalen Black and Roman Hemby both combined for just over 150 yards combined. That really told me that this is probably the most balanced team in college football. There's nothing that they do that's flashy, but they're balanced and they play fundamental football. They win all 3 phases of the game. Through them on offense, they own the line of scrimmage, and they're sound in how they run their routes. They're sound in gap integrity. On the defensive side of the ball, they do not let anything get behind them. They don't give up explosive plays. And then special teams wise, all you got to do is just be able to get yourself into good field position. And if you have to kick a field goal, kick a field goal. And if you have to flip the field, you flip the field. That's what you were able to do all of last year. And you're absolutely right, Alec. You dominated at Oregon. You dominated at Autzen Stadium. Just because it's 30-20, that doesn't reflect what the play on the field indicated. That looked like a 20-point beatdown, in my opinion. That really solidified me ripping the label off of them as Blue Bloods championship contenders. But that Illinois game really ripped off Cinderella.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think it was a little frustrating for the team itself, but maybe not so much for the fan base, because the fan base got to be like, I can't believe nobody believes in this football team. But to go into that Illinois game and the perception publicly be that Illinois is the team that everyone should have been talking about Indiana as, definitely added to that. But yeah, you can't be a Cinderella once you beat a top 10 team by 50.
After that Big Ten title game, again, that was another game, in my opinion, where you own the line of scrimmage, you own the time of possession. That was a thing that Indiana was pretty much well known for. All year long, you own the time of possession. And once you got past Ohio State, I think that was your last challenge that you were going to be able to face all the way up until you got to the national championship. I had Indiana going all the way. I didn't think that Alabama was going to have a prayer. I really thought that it'd be a lot closer than 38-3. Just though that stretch of those 2 games, the Alabama and Oregon game, what clicked for that team as a whole coming off of a close game that they had against Ohio State?
Well, I think the Ohio State game, but Ohio State to me still is the second best team in the country. And it's funny to watch Caleb Downs do the if game and be like, if we did this and if we played them again. But I mean, the reality is they lost to Miami and we didn't get to see that game twice. But that game was won by Charlie Becker's ability to win one-on-one on the outside and Fernando's ability to place the football and the defensive performance of that team. But then after that, a lot of people don't realize that Indiana, those guys were playing hurt a lot of the season. Mikal Kamara was dealing with shoulder stuff since the UCLA game. Aiden Fisher was dealing with a knee thing or an elbow thing. Surratt was dealing with a hamstring. Those guys were pretty beat up, and they were light at defensive end. Kamara especially was playing through a ton of pain.
Yes.
And then so you give those guys, everyone was making a huge deal about the time off. It's like those guys actually really needed the time off. So you give the Indiana team that needed a little bit of rest, some time to rest, and you give that coaching staff who's psychopaths at watching film and game planning for their individual opponents anyway, an extended period of time to look at both Oklahoma, Alabama, and Oregon and Texas Tech and scout whoever you need to scout. It was a perfect storm of we're well rested, we're well scouted, and we're like, sorry for rhyming, but still doubted for some reason. And like to go into that Alabama game and to be like, half the country thinks that just because the logo on the helmets that they're going to get smacked around. It's actually kind of crazy. But to see the way that they absolutely dominated those two football games, it was like, yeah, completely with you. Like Ohio State was the challenge. I remember talking to my co-host and having legitimate conversations about would you rather win the Big Ten championship or a national championship if you could only pick one. But yeah, after watching the way they dominated those two games wasn't super surprising just because the time leading up to the Alabama game. And then also, like we just talked about, they dominated the game out at Autzen. And so to take it from Autzen Stadium to a neutral site that's across the country, that's in a city that has a strong Hoosier alumni base, we were pretty confident that the stadium was going to be 75% at least Indiana. It wasn't expecting 95%. I was lucky enough to be in the building for the Peach Bowl, and it was absolutely deafening in there. It was a Hoosier home game like I've never seen before. But thinking about the way they performed out at Autzen and then transitioning to a true road game basically for Oregon against a team that's even more well-rested. And then Charlie Becker wasn't even a factor in the offense when Indiana played Oregon the first time. Then you look at the way Oregon was decimated by injury. Both their coordinators were like coaching other football teams and recruiting for other football teams full time. So yeah, I think it was unsurprising to most Indiana fans that they kind of walked to the national championship.
You know, when I first saw the live stream, because I don't know how familiar you are with Tyler Noe and Lance Barton of Always Talk Ball. So they have I think they are pretty strong in the Indiana fan base. I had no idea that Atlanta was that strong of an alumni fan base for IU. Like that was something that I had no idea that was a place that they would flock to. I saw the post about how there was a tailgate outside. Did you end up going to the tailgate?
I actually had some unique circumstances. One of my buddies is pretty well connected in the city of Atlanta, so I was actually on the field pregame, so I didn't do a ton of tailgating, but I had friends who were popping around. I know that they had to shut down Crimson Cast, who's an Indiana podcast in the space. Galen Claudio.
I think that was the one that was hosting the tailgate, wasn't it?
Yeah, they actually had to like shut down they couldn't let people in the building anymore because there was too many people. I was at a place that was just packed with Indiana fans, and it was everywhere you looked in the city of Atlanta. There were Hoosiers, whether it was close to the stadium or not. And again, I have a ton of friends who I went to school with from the city, and you forget how close it is to Bloomington. And
right.
It's like the East Coast kids that I know ended up in New York. The Midwest and the West Coast kids ended up in Chicago, and the kids who came from the South ended up in Atlanta.
It's pretty amazing how you guys were able to fill up about 90% of the stadium. Like that was just incredible to me. I was at the Sugar Bowl, and I was down on the field, and I would say that there was about 70 to 75% Ole Miss fans. If you were to put Indiana fans in that stadium alone, they probably would have already filled up the entire stadium. There probably would have only been about 4,000, maybe 5,000 Georgia fans at most. There would have been a lot of Indiana fans in the Superdome. It's amazing how you guys were able to travel well for the game. Interesting.
Well, I don't want to cut you off, but I don't think it's. I mean, they do travel well, but also there's it's the largest living alumni base in the country. There is a ton of alumni like in most big cities, and so like there's a huge presence of Hoosiers down in Dallas, and the ability for this fan base to both travel but also just live in the cities that these games are already being played in is a really underrated part of why we were able to see the fan base, quote unquote, travel so well while also still having some attendance issues when it comes to these non-con games in Bloomington.
Why is that?
I think it's funny. We talked about it on Indiana Hoosiers Live last week or 2 weeks ago that it's hard to get to Bloomington. Like it's not hard. Like you fly into Indy and it's a 40-minute drive, but then like if you don't get a hotel quickly or close to Bloomington, like it's it's difficult to find a place to stay. And so that's why when these fan bases that are used to just kind of rolling into Bloomington, and Indiana's a pushover program, and they just kind of book their hotels the week of, like, you can't do that anymore. Like, Indiana season tickets for this upcoming season are completely sold out. And I'm assuming that all the hotels are being booked up as well. Like, when my buddies and I ended up like getting out there for the UCLA game, we were looking at like campsites and different Airbnbs, and we ended up like 15 minutes outside of Bloomington. But it's a little bit of an adventure to try and find your way there as a fan if you're not completely familiar with the surrounding area.
Wow. Here was an interesting statistic that I found a couple of weeks ago before the Peach Bowl. In the history of Indiana, they have a 2-11 bowl record, and you end up with 3 bowl wins this same year. That just blew my mind. Knowing the long history of Indiana, I always knew that they were not the best program in college football. In fact, I think they were one of the worst in all of college football. And then to have a 3-1 bowl record in Signetti's 2 years there, and then you win a national championship on top of that, that's just impressive to me. So I want to transition into the offseason. I want to talk about the portal, what you guys have been able to do. The biggest question mark around that is obviously what your offensive line is going to look like. Both sides of the line of scrimmage is going to lose a lot. But I think you've been able to revamp pretty well. I like Joe Brunner, the guard from Wisconsin. I think he's going to be really, really good. I like Joshua Burnham. Think he's got a high motor from Notre Dame. Really underrated guy coming off the edge. But the biggest storyline around that is Josh Hoover obviously committing. I really liked him at TCU. I think he's going to play a major contributor. Here's what was also an interesting statistic that I realized. Josh Hoover's the youngest quarterback that Mike Shanahan is going to work with during his time in Indiana. He worked with Curtis Rourke, who had been in college football for, I think, 4 or 5 seasons previously at Ohio. He worked with Fernando Mendoza, who had been in college football for some time with Cal. How does this translate? How does the offense begin to work with a guy like Josh Hoover, and what could he potentially bring in Mike Shanahan's offense?
Well, so I do want to unpack one thing you said there. Is actually, it's funny, the offensive line is technically returning 4 starters. You have Carter Smith, the left tackle, returning Big Ten Offensive Lineman of the Year. The left guard is going to be Drew Evans, back for a 3rd season in Curt Cignetti's offense. Bray Lynch is going to slide over from right guard to center. Brunner, we assume, is going to slide into that right guard position. And Ademola Ajani, if you want to count the Penn State game, parts of the Big Ten championship, and then the national championship game, he was technically the right tackle starter when the season ended.
Well, then my apologies. That just shows my lack of knowledge around Big Ten football too. So
no. I think it's when you look at who they lost, they lose Pat Coogan, and then you look at they didn't really make a big time addition to the offensive line besides Brunner, and so there was a lot of people, even in the Indiana fan base, who were nervous about the depth of the offensive line. And I actually think that they have a chance to be even better this season than next season. But for Josh Hoover, I haven't heard the youngest quarterback that Mike Shanahan's worked with. That's really interesting. In terms of starting experience, though, Fernando Mendoza, when he showed up on Indiana's campus, had, I believe, a year and change of starting experience. He took over about a couple games into his sophomore season at Cal, I believe, so he didn't even have 2 full years of starting experience. Rourke, a little bit different, had I believe, 4 full years or 3 full years with the injury in there. Hoover, super experienced guy. Most returning passing yards and passing touchdowns in the country, I believe. Might have to get stat corrected on that one, though. But he's an absolute gunslinger. He's a playmaker. He's fearless. He's competitive. He's got the arm to make any throw on the field. The thing is, when you watch the offense he was running at TCU, it was a lot of turn your back to the defense, play action, RPO stuff. And while he was able to run that at a really high level, that's just not what he's going to be asked to do in the Mike Shanahan, Curt Cignetti offense. He's never going to turn his back to the defense, rarely ever. They're going to have the offense structured in a way that takes advantage of his strengths. The thing that people don't give Signetti and Shanahan enough credit for is that they truly do build the offense around the quarterback. And so while the playmakers were very similar between the 24 Hoosiers and the 2025 Hoosiers, Curtis Work was playing on a torn ACL and didn't really have any mobility to his game. You saw what happened when Indiana was able to implement the QB draw with Mendoza. But even he wasn't like a true dual threat guy. He was able to hurt you with his legs if he was scrambling, but it wasn't something that they were building into the offense. I think Hoover's movability in the pocket is a little bit better than people want to give him credit for. His ability to make throws off platform down the field is really, really special. And while he's not as accurate outside the hashes as Mendoza is, he's unbelievably good at throwing the football over the middle of the field. And so I think we're going to see an offense built around his ability to deliver the football quickly, to process quickly, and then get the ball in the hands of playmakers like Nick Marsh and Charlie Becker, who are going to be two of the best 5 receivers in the country heading into next season.
I stand corrected. Fernando Mendoza is the youngest quarterback that Mike Shanahan has worked with by about 3.5 months, but still both relatively around the same age. But yeah, I agree with you. Look, Charlie Becker really turned it on after that Penn State game. Very quiet through the first couple weeks of the season, even last year. I think he's primed in for another massive year. If he's not a finalist for the Biletnikoff in 2026, it's a crime. I think he's one of the more underrated receivers in all of college football. I called him Charlie Clutch after the Big Ten championship game. That was one of my second introduction to him after the Penn State game when you go on that great drive. But I really, really, really like the array of guys that you have returning it from an offensive side, offensive production field. Are they a projected top 5 team in your opinion going into next year? I know that I've talked with other media members. They say they have Indiana at number 1 overall to start the year. Where would you have Indiana at this point in time if you were to rank them with where they are right now with that roster?
Oh, it's funny. I don't like ever putting self-imposed limitations on a Curt Cignetti-led football team. I don't also love making record predictions either because I think you can kind of put yourself in a box. But my co-host Bradley Loomis over at the Voice of College Football likes to say that if you're just going to seriously run an AP poll, the first AP poll of every year should just be the last AP poll of the season before. And so I would have the Indiana Hoosiers at number 1. I would have no problem with that. And I think when you look at the team they brought back, even though they're not bringing back a returning star, like their returning starter, but they're bringing back an experienced quarterback who they've identified to lead their offense. If you look at the way that the last 2 seasons under Curt Cignetti have gone for the Indiana Hoosiers, but just look at Curt Cignetti's career as a head coach, to not take that guy at his word at this point in his life would be kind of insane. And so I don't have any issues with Indiana anywhere in the top 5. I think when you get outside of that, it becomes a little bit silly, but at the same time, we're talking about rankings that are about football teams that aren't going to play games until September. But no, I think anywhere outside the top 5 would be criminal for this team.
What's the game that you would say outside of the Ohio State game that is probably one of the more critical games for IU?
It's funny. I as much as I want to complain's the wrong word, but as much as I want to talk about the fact that Indiana has everyone has one bye and Indiana's bye is 9 or 10 weeks into the season. I think Northwestern has a week 2 bye and plays 11 straight football games. So it's that is so much worse than what Indiana has to deal with. But the 2 hardest games, I believe, on Indiana's schedule, at least on paper, are the Ohio State game. And then the week before they travel to Michigan. And those 2 football games are Game 7 and Game 8 of a 9 straight game stretch. And so that Michigan game with a Kyle Whittingham team that's going to be really physical. They're unbelievably talented, obviously. And in a road environment where they're going to have 100,000 plus people screaming their heads off. That's the one that I'm circling. The Washington game also later in the season. I believe it's the second game after the bye. I want to say Indiana hosts USC coming off the bye. With that Washington game, anytime you have to travel to the West Coast and play in that environment, a team that's really good at home, one that I'm keeping an eye on as well. But like you said, the biggest one I'm circling is the Ohio State one, and I still haven't figured out my what I'm going to do yet because one of my best friends growing up, I'm literally in the wedding party, is getting married that weekend. So, but his mom's a Hoosier, his sister's a Hoosier, so we're going to figure it out.
That's a Josh Pate sin. You know that. You can't get married in the fall.
I know. It's tough, but I can't get out of this one. I'm in the wedding party.
The Indiana Hoosiers looking ready for what could be another fantastic year in 2026. The Band-Aid of them being Cinderella has officially been ripped off. They're a blue blood contender from here until things change in the Curt Cignetti era. Alec Keezer of the Sigs Inside Podcast in Indiana Live at the Voice of College Football joining us. Alex, where can we find your work, my friend?
At Alec Keezer on X is the epicenter for everything. Then obviously Indiana at the Voice of College Football on YouTube. We're live every Tuesday night. We're dropping clips on the YouTube channel. At Sigs Inside Pod on Twitter, we go live through the account in Indiana at the Voice of College Football, or Indiana VOCFB on Twitter is where you're gonna find me.
Alec, we appreciate your time, brother. Thank you guys again for watching us here on the Southern Sports Scene. Once again, hit the like, share, and subscribe down below. Turn on the bell notifications so that you are notified every time we post a new video, short or live show, as we do every weekday. Alex, have a great rest of the week, my friend, and we'll talk soon.
Talk soon. Appreciate you having me.